Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to the session. Given the size of the crowd, I think it'll go relatively fast, and you'll be off to lunch pretty soon. So, let me go ahead and share some of the details of what we are doing and how we are using Cassandra, and especially for solutions in life sciences. So, just to give you a high-level background in terms of what Reltio does. We're using Cassandra to essentially drive our platform or the storage for our platform, where we are enabling applications that run on the convergence of enterprise internal application data, third-party data feeds, and social media type of data sources. And we have a software as a service capability that we provide to our customers, where they're able to come in and bring in their data and work with us on the specific applications that they're trying to enable for their sales, marketing, or compliance type of requirements. We are currently focused on life sciences and financial services, but the capabilities that we have created are vertical agnostic, so we are looking at extending it into other verticals also. But in terms of our use of some of the technologies, Cassandra is the real-time data store for us, as well as some of the other components such as Hadoop and Elasticsearch that we're using in conjunction with that. We decided to use Elasticsearch because of certain reasons in terms of how we wanted to index the data for various types of search capabilities. Instead of using Solar, which was integrated with the DataStax distribution, but had certain limitations for us in terms of what we were trying to do. And I'll explain some of that in the presentation. The capabilities that we have are there to support multi-tenancy, make sure that we can onboard multiple sources of data, and provide the applications on top of that that the customers can use. At the same time, one of the big reasons for going with Cassandra was to ensure that we can also support high availability type of scenarios, so that the solution is always up and running. In terms of the life sciences vertical and the work that we are doing here, some of the drivers for that in terms of the kinds of applications that we are creating, as well as what the life sciences or the pharmaceutical industry is reacting to right now, is the fact that the sales model that they have is changing. And earlier what they used to do was they used to engage or work with the doctors or prescribers who would be responsible for writing the prescriptions. And they were essentially their direct contact for influencing or promoting sales. So the sales team alignment as well as incentive compensation was based on that direct sales results or performance that they would see on an individual doctor or prescriber basis. But now, given some of the recent healthcare changes, the model is shifting towards account-based sales strategy. And there it becomes a little bit more complex, because you not only have to understand who the prescribers are who write these different kinds of prescriptions, because they're still going to be involved and part of the equation from a sales perspective and a marketing perspective. But at the same time, the Kaisers or Sutter Health type of groups are becoming more influential and powerful in negotiating some of the pricing around what kinds of drugs are on their roster. As well as the hospitals, because of the latest changes in the healthcare space, are forming buying groups. So, a term that you might have heard about, accountable care organizations. They are necessarily being formed to drive down the cost of procurement of these drugs and the services that are being provided by these hospitals. So again, the model is shifting more towards B2B rather than being a B2C or business to prescriber type of model. And at the same time, all of the payers in the space are also starting to influence the pricing strategies around this and the buying decisions around it. So they are having a greater part to play in this equation. And the last part of this changing equation is that online pharmacies are becoming the drivers for negotiating some of the pricing contracts with these pharmaceutical companies. And in order to really drive how pharmaceutical companies should look at pricing, the sales model, because they have a direct sales force, and how it goes out into the field and engages with the rest of the um, uh, community on the sales side, has to change, because you can no longer afford to have them focus only on one prescriber or a set of prescribers. You have to look at accounts, you have to look at the value of the account, the potential sales and the revenues that can be generated out of it, and also competitive insights in terms of what are other pharmaceutical companies doing with the same set of hospitals or payers or these online pharmacies. And that's becoming increasingly a part of the decision-making process in terms of how the sales and the marketing organizations within these pharma companies are reacting to the situation. And in order to better illustrate the sort of the complexity of the problem, a lot of this has to do with understanding not only some of the details around who are the individual prescribers, or what groups do they work for, what clinics they might be affiliated with, and if that clinic or hospital is a part of a larger chain. Those are all the different kinds of data points or intersections that need to be understood. Uh, in, uh, in the US alone, there are about 700 or 7.5 million prescribers, about 500,000 clinics, hospitals, or what you would typically refer to as healthcare organizations. And a lot of these have interconnected affiliations, because you have healthcare uh, organizations that are organized into a legal entity or a hierarchical structure, because that's their reporting structure, or that's how they do business. But at the same time, you have the different prescribers who are responsible for writing the prescriptions, who influence and refer patients to each other. So there is a healthcare provider to a healthcare provider type of affiliation network that needs to be understood to better understand the influence that these people yield in how they will be able to help promote some of the drugs. And at the same time, these different individuals who are responsible for writing prescriptions, they also work for one or more clinics or hospitals, because rarely ever do you see a doctor who's not affiliated or working with more than one clinic or hospital. So that also plays a big part into figuring out how we should go ahead and engage these different kinds of customers. Although the drugs are being sold to us, but we are the indirect consumers of that. From a sales or marketing engagement point of view, the prescribers, the people responsible for writing the prescriptions, are the main targets in this whole equation. And in order to get a better picture that would essentially help drive a lot of the decision making on the sales, marketing, or the compliance side, most of the pharmaceutical companies are collecting data about these prescribers, about these healthcare organizations, and they also buy third-party data feeds. So there are third-party data vendors that provide some of this information, but none of these sources are accurate in the sense that there's always a gap in terms of what kind of information is available, because this is not just the simple name and address type of demographic information. It also includes which what states are these prescribers licensed to practice in. It has to be validated information, confirmed information, because in a lot of these cases, when drugs are being dropped as samples, you cannot give a sample to a doctor who's not licensed or anybody who's not licensed to be able to handle that kind of a drug. So in any case, most of these companies buy data from third-party data vendors. And on an average, they typically, when you look at small to large pharmaceutical enterprises, they typically have 12 or more of their own internal sources, which are multiple sales, CRM type of applications, fulfillment applications, any other type of SAP type of applications. They have data about these types of entities in there. And they try to consolidate and combine that to get better information across their enterprise. But at the same time, they also have a dozen or more different data sources that they buy on a periodic basis. So some of these sources provide information on a weekly basis. Some of these are quarterly updates to the information. And that, again, is information that they want to consolidate. At the same time, the third aspect around this is how most of the pharmaceutical companies are starting to leverage and use the social media type of sources. In some cases, they're leveraging their own internal networks that they're setting up for patient engagement and learning more about disease states. But the other part of this is that they are also starting to engage or market their products and have presence over some of the traditional social media networks that you see, such as Facebook and Twitter. And in that case, there is also information that they're trying to glean from there and bring it in so that it can form a part of this relevant information that they can use to drive certain types of insights, brand management, or engagement with the different kinds of hospitals and prescribers. And a part of this, which really adds up to the big data piece of this, is all of the different types of elements. So reference data is essentially the piece where they have demographic or firmographic type of information. But then they also have prescription sales that are getting reported. So CVS or Walgreens, all of these companies are in the business of selling whatever prescription you're consuming back to the pharmaceutical company so that they can understand the sales aspect of it and what is being sold, what is being prescribed by different doctors, by different hospitals, buying groups, and they can roll it up all into their sales metrics that they measure from time to time. And on top of that, they also have claims processing. So all of the information that flows back to the insurance companies also comes in as a data feed. So every claim that is being made by the insurance company or by the provider flows back into the gamut of data that these companies have access to. And then on top of that, any information around how you're forming the referral network. So if you go to your general physician and you get referred to a specialist, that's referral information that's, again, flowing back into these data collection type of systems. And this is where we are helping them understand the overlap and overlay of this information across the different data sources that they're combining together. But on top of that, what it helps them drive is to measure account profitability. So understanding what are the sales that are currently being driven and what is the potential size of the account, what can be the potential revenue that can be generated from these accounts, or understanding any kind of price leakage, because when you look at Kaiser or Sutter, these are large organizations, or some of the insurance companies, these are large organizations, and having multiple contracts can lead to price leakage type of scenarios. So you want to have a consistent set of pricing policies or discounts or rebates that are being offered across the board to these large organizations. And any mismanagement of that leads to big numbers that can impact the revenue of the companies. And in this case, they also want to understand how they should align their sales teams to these various accounts. So for example, If it is a large organization, looking at it not only from the point of view of the depth of how many different hospitals and clinics will be able to cover if we sell into this account or break into this account, but also understanding how many prescribers are we going to be able to cover through this kind of an account strategy. So aligning their teams to that instead of just trying to figure out in a zip code how many prescribers are there and how many people should be assigned to that zip code because there are 50,000 different doctors working in that area. So instead of trying to go down that path, which was more of a one-to-one sales model, now it's based on the value of the account and what kind of revenues can be generated out of it, and what's the level of investment they're willing to make from the point of view of if this is a large account, do we need a team that maintains this account, or if this is a large account, we haven't done much business, our competitors are in there and they're doing a volume of business, how do we push them out? There may not be direct incentives in place that are tied to sales or the revenues generated, but then they would have to change their incentive compensation strategy based on that information. And that's where the alignment of the team comes into play. And the last part, again, is that in order for them to make any kind of shift in terms of how they send their salespeople into the field, they really have to change the incentive compensation model. And in order to change that incentive compensation, they have to understand some of these insights before they start aligning their teams in that direction and creating the right incentives for them. From the point of view of what we are trying to understand and connect here, again, an overly simplistic picture, but any kind of entity-to-entity relationship. So, for example, trying to take all of the different hospitals, different healthcare providers, any kinds of contacts or details that they have, putting all of that information together and building out a network graph that can be used for certain types of analytics, and understanding the reach, rank, and relevance of these different kinds of entities. Bringing in information that allows us to also apply certain type of structure to the data, in the sense that when we are dealing with large organizations, there is a legal entity type of structure or a commercial contracting type of structure that needs to be maintained and defined. This is where the structured trees and hierarchies come into play. And then essentially creating these information maps that allow us to traverse all of the information and create insights that would essentially allow us to understand account opportunity from a high to a low scale, or the degree of complexity of certain accounts, and do the distribution so that now with this information we can decide what kind and what size of a team is going to focus on those accounts versus these are low value accounts, and how much effort are we going to put into these. And that's the kind of information that we are driving with this. And at the same time, as we are collating information from these different sources, unlike a traditional analytics system, we are using the Cassandra capabilities to also open it up as an application, this complete set of data that can be further curated, and the field itself, or the sales reps in the field. So every company has about, let's say when you look at Eli Lilly or Merck or some of the large organizations, they have about 5 to 10,000 sales reps in the field. And in those cases, any information that they can bring in and help curate the information further acts as a crowdsourcing mechanism for that information that further enriches it and further enhances the value of the data set that we are helping curate. We're also doing similar kind of work in the clinical trial space, where the nature of the problem is very similar, but the different kind of stages that a pharmaceutical company has to go through in terms of drug development are different. And at each one of these stages, the problem remains the same, that you have to bring in disparate and different kinds of data connected together, and then provide that data as a seamless flow from the start to the end so that you are able to measure patient engagement, any metrics or feedbacks that you get from the clinical trials that you run, and bringing that back into the drug development cycle. In terms of what we did or tried initially before we decided to move things over to Cassandra, so we, like everybody else, went down the traditional path, tried using Oracle, defining star schemas, and bringing together some of this information. In the past, the team at Reltio comes from an area of work known as master data management, where it focuses on essentially combining some of the dimensional or the what you would call as the referential data sets, which are typically demographic or firmographic or product type of information, entity type of information. But in case of the type of problems that we were trying to solve now, we had to combine that dimensional data with all of the fact data and look at the analysis across the board. And in that case, trying to support both the master data management capabilities, which require matching disparate data sets, merging them together, maintaining crosswalks for the different sources that provide different types of information, as well as maintaining all of the history and lineage, because from a compliance standpoint, you need complete visibility into when was a change made, who made the change, where did the information come from, what were the contributing sources for a specific attribute. All of that lineage is something that we needed to maintain, which increased the total volume of information that would build up over a period of time. But on top of that, combining it with claims data, sales, prescription sales type of information, or any of the transactions, that's where we ran into challenges, because first of all, it was disparate type of records with completely different fields on them, and we needed a flexible solution for it in order to move forward. So what we did was we defined a sort of a universal or a meta model on top of Cassandra, where we first go in, define some of the entities, which can have any range or number of attributes associated with them. But on top of that, you can have different kinds of entities. So you can have healthcare providers, healthcare organizations, products, payers, individuals, organizations, locations, all different kinds of nodes that you would think of in a graph. But on top of that, ability to create different kinds of segments or groups out of it based on certain rules and capabilities. But then creating taxonomy structures around it so that you can have groups of groups or the various hierarchies around them. And then understanding how different entities link to each other, so all of the different kinds of relationships. Some of these can be the point A to point B type of affiliations or relationships that you capture, but then some of these can have structure associated with them, which is where hierarchies start to come into play. And then essentially defining collections of these different pieces of relationship information that give us ability to define graphs and manage them from that point on. And then associating different kinds of transactions that are flowing in from multiple channels of disparate kind and different sources, and associating them to one or more actors or entities in this mix. And that's essentially the kind of meta model that we have created on top of Cassandra, which is real time, which is our primary data storage. It not only allows us to bring in batch or real-time API workloads into it, but also have direct users hitting the system and updating the information at any point in time, while keeping the system up and running 24/7. And at the same time, maintaining some of the traditional or the essential pieces of information, such as matching these entities, maintaining crosswalks, or doing dimensional rollups and aggregations. And in terms of how we've deployed it, typical model, we have the Cassandra cluster, but we have a separate cluster for Elasticsearch, which takes the real-time information, anything that is flowing in. and then essentially any of the API or the UI capabilities that are distributed and again deployed in a cluster. And that's our deployment model for what we've built out using some of the Cassandra capabilities. That brings me to the end of my presentation. So I just wanted to share this story with you in terms of how we are using Cassandra and how we are leveraging its capabilities. Any questions? Yes, it is our own product. We have built it out on top of Cassandra. So the question was, is the graph database our own product, or are we leveraging something else? We are using Cassandra as the primary storage, and we have built out the graph capabilities on top of Cassandra. And that's our own work that we put into place.
Yeah, I think Pitney Bowes has a similar product for MDM, graph
yes,
database.
And
right?
in terms of the capabilities that they have, it's deployable on individual machines. It's only vertically scalable. Our graph capabilities are horizontally scalable and can be distributed across a cluster.
Thanks.
Any other questions? We have time for one more. No? All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you.